Okay, so this is going to be kind of fun. So I've broken this up in this talk into two parts. The first part is kind of like an overview of like OKRs and what to do. And then we'll get into the fun part, which is what not to do. How many people here actually are familiar with OKRs? We don't have a lot of people, so I can see on video, so you can just raise your hands. Okay, so I can't see everybody, but it looks like a few are. Okay, but it looks like a few. And how many are not? Ask the reverse question. How many have like no experience with OKRs? Everybody here has experience. Okay, one. Okay, so I'm going to move pretty quickly then through the what are they part. If y'all don't know and haven't read it, Measure What Matters is kind of like the Bible around OKRs. John Doerr used to work for Andy Grove at Intel, and that was many years ago. And that's where he learned from Andy this approach that he then took out into the wild, brought to lots of companies for doing this OKR thing. So, just quickly, it's good to remind us, what is this OKR thing about? And it's about a way to link our business goals to our execution. So we do a lot of things as organizations, as product organizations. There's a lot of work that we're doing. How do we ensure that that work that we're doing is actually tied to what's important for the business? And going back to the title of John's book, Measure What Matters. How do we ensure that we're doing the work that actually matters? That's really at the end of the day what all of this is about. It's just about ensuring that we have this alignment between what is important to the business and the work that we're actually going to do. Now, just to say a little bit about me and my experience with OKRs, I first started getting into OKRs when I was at Auth0 a couple of years ago. We as an organization decided, as many organizations do, to kind of jump in with zero guidance to start doing it. It's the best way to do it, to start doing OKRs and learn through fire, and hopefully things get better. But across the board, as an organization that had several hundred people, we decided to really go deep in on OKRs. And so I did that for a while, got some experiences. After that, have continued to kind of work with OKRs, and since joining Microsoft about 9 months ago, my whole org is very focused on OKRs. Hint, though, any of you have heard the term Scrum or Fall? It applies in the OKR world as well. So you might say we're doing OKRs, but are you actually doing them correctly in a way that they're actually going to help you? Or are you just going through motions and using terminology that's popular and that satisfies your management? So this is a very real thing. I haven't heard the OKR fall term used, but it should be. So two high-level concepts we know of in OKRs: objectives. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Key results. How are we going to get there? And so a couple of key things about objectives: they really should be tied to goals. They should be long-lived, but they should be tangible. If they're not tangible, they're just not useful. They're not going to be, other stakeholders are not going to really understand what they're about. We're going to go into some examples. And then we have our key results, which have to be measurable. Now, there's a lot of debate about what does measurable mean. Measurable doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a number. It means it's something that is verifiable. You'll see lots of examples I'm going to use from classic companies where it is not about like a number, like hitting 20% of X. It is simply like, we did this thing, but we can verify that it was done. And ideally, key results should be about business impact versus things we do. There's a lot of things we do, but how do we know we're doing the things that are impacting the business? Now, what I'll say, and this is constantly a reminder for myself, it doesn't mean that a key result can't be that we did this thing, but that should only be a key result if it is perceived that that key result is going to directly be tied to business impact. Now, you'll get a lot of debate on this because you'll get some people, and I've even been in this camp, who are saying it must only be, something that's related to numbers, related to the growth of the business. And that may be somebody's personal perception, but one of the reasons I've shared a bunch of examples from the book is to show that in practice, that is not the case. They can be committed versus aspirational. So, committed are things that we're really confident we're going to be able to achieve those results. Aspirational is we're going to try. We feel pretty confident, but we're not 100% sure. Don't be surprised if we don't hit it. Whereas in committed case, we're saying we're really confident we're going to hit it. If we don't hit it, we messed up. Something's wrong. And so I think this is also really important, is that OKRs are about pushing yourself as an organization. John Doerr talks a lot about this in the book. It's actually like, how do we push ourselves to go to new heights? So it's not about being super comfortable and saying like, oh yeah, we could do this. It's like, what do we need to aspire to and really push ourselves in order to be able to achieve? And so it's a balance, obviously, and that's why you have the committed versus the aspirational, because the committed ones are ones that you're really sure on. And then there's the grading part. I'll talk a bit more about the grade. I think the grade is one that throws a lot of people off, like how you should use it. So I'll talk a bit about that. You just keep track of time. So let's take a look at an example. This is one that is like, what, 40 years old or 50? It's very old. But this is real. This is not some hypothetical. So this was from Intel, from Andy Grove. So let's look at it also in the light of some of the patterns I was talking about and some of the zealotry that's out there. Like if you look at this, so this is, what's the objective? Objective is about establishing the 8086 as like the leader from a performance perspective. And then if you look at the key results, some of these things do have numbers associated with them, like 5 benchmarks. But some of them are just like, hey, we're going to repackage the whole family. That's a marketing thing. And all we're doing is measuring like, did it happen or didn't it happen? Same thing with, 3 and 4. All of these things are things that the business has determined are important. That's the most important thing, not whether it has a number associated with it. And this is even a reminder to myself, because I get in a lot of conversations. And very recently went back to John's book as part of prepping for this presentation. And it was like, I've been one of those who's been like, no, we need to get to the number. Like, what percentage of the business are we increasing? I think the spirit of this really, and where I've come back to quite recently, is we just need to think about what is important to the business, and is this something that is perceived as directly impacting the business, as opposed to just things we will do. Now, there's a lot of gray in all of this, because you might say, well, why would we do anything if it wasn't important to the business? And so that's a good valid question. But if you have too many OKRs, an anti-pattern there, it's just going to be really hard to manage. It's going to be really hard to focus. It's not to say that the OKRs are a reflection of every single thing that you'll do, but we try to align. We try to at least say that everything we're doing aligns with what our OKRs are. So let's look at another one. So this one is Coursera. This has a few numbers in it, right? But look at the first one. The first one is very much something could be measurable, like we're going to perform these tests, we're going to iterate, we're going to be able to record that actually happened. But it's not, again, related to users of the product and, like product usage numbers, all that other stuff. Or even looking at the third one. I mean, and that's very general. And I think that's also okay. Like, you're going to do, for any of your key results that you have, there's going to be work that's going to get done in order to meet those key results. And the key result does not have to be reflective or descriptive of all of that work. It's the way you're going to measure. So here we said, hey, we're going to create internal tools to track key growth metrics. If I worked at Coursera, which I don't, what does that mean? What are the specifics? We don't know at this point, and that's okay. But we will be able to tell when we come back later and we go to look at the key result to say like, hey, we actually did create these tools and we are able to track our metrics. So a lot of gray here. And as long as we remember the spirit of what this is about and keep to that spirit, I think that is the most important thing. There's people in my work right now that will be laughing at me considering how I've said the opposite of that on some occasions. Remember, what goes on in Product Tank stays in Product Tank, except for the Zoom recording that will be available for the world. But so then this one is a great one. I love this one because this is also on a really large scale. This was actually Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. So this is their OKR for, hey, that's a pretty big objective. Let's eradicate malaria by 2040, and here are the key results and things that we need to do. So by the way, all of this is in the book. I'm taking these examples directly from the book. So if you've not read that book, I really recommend you read it. It covers a lot of the spirit and the philosophy. We often get really caught up in the mechanics and forgetting that those mechanics are supportive of a spirit. And the spirit is more important than the mechanics. So that would be my advice. So the grade is one that causes people a lot of trouble. So the grade is deliberately a subjective value. And the way that Google does this, and the book also talks about this, but again, it doesn't have to be exactly this way, is that the grade is between 0 and 1. And the grade is a subject. Why is the grade subjective? Because you might have hit your target. All OKRs have a target. You might have hit your target, but when you look at it, you say, you know what? We hit our target, but we actually didn't push ourselves as much as we should have. And so we didn't set a target that was actually aggressive enough. So we're going to give ourselves a lower rating, even though we actually hit the target that we set out to hit. The reverse might happen as well. You went out, let's look at COVID, right? Imagine you had an OKR before COVID, and then suddenly like this crazy thing happened that rocked the industry. And you weren't going to be able to achieve the goals that you set out, but you worked really hard to do it. There were just unforeseen things that came in the way. You might still give yourself a 0.7, which is that we did great because this was beyond our control. And this is why it's subjective. These are the things that if you make it objective and only based on data, you're not going to get the right value. And the other question is, well, why do we do this? This is all about learning. We want to be able to capture that, hey, you know what? We actually didn't push ourselves as much as we should. So this is an opportunity to learn. That's a key part of what the grade is really about. Just looking at my time. Any questions? I know we went a bit further into the primer. Hopefully this was helpful in terms of some of the examples. Any questions, comments on what we've covered so far? Okay. Is this helpful? Is it resonating?
Oh yeah, it's resonating, and great examples. And I think I'm eager to see all of the missteps. That's the juice. That's the juicy stuff.
Yep, cool. So I do want to jump into one before we get there. Thank you. So there are tools for doing, for OKRs, and I'm actually going to show you one that I've been playing with recently before we get to the not to do list. All right, let me see.
While you're looking for that, I will say I had not heard of grading your OKRs, but it makes sense. And
yeah, and I've got a link that I've shared that points. There's actually a What Matters. There's a website which I linked to from the authors. It's called What Matters. Whatmatters.com has a lot of detail on grading. But yeah, no, grading is an essential part of this whole thing. Okay, so there are tools for doing this, and one of the, I guess, I didn't add this as an anti-pattern, but it's one that I've experienced, is where we try to use tools that were not
Glenn, you're
built
not
for
seeing your
OKRs for
screen anymore.
OKRs. And I'm living that reality right now. Wait, is
Glenn,
that?
we're not seeing your screen anymore.
I know I haven't shared yet.
Okay.
I'm about to. I'm about to share.
We were seeing that arrow. Yeah, now we see it.
Okay, so this is a product called Ally.io. One of the premier OKR tools you hear a lot about is BetterWorks. That's what we used when we were at Auth0. One thing I really like about Ally is that BetterWorks is a full-on performance management tool. So it has way more than OKRs. OKRs are part of it. Ally is a very specific tool just for objectives and key results. BetterWorks is great if you want the whole suite of things, but in our case, or in my case, I didn't need all that. And one thing I really like about Ally, and I recommend if you're interested in OKRs that you sign up for it. It's not a pitch for them, like I don't get paid by them, but they actually have a demo sandbox, and that's what I'm in right now. And if you create a trial account, they have this library of OKRs that you can actually add, to your workspace, just as samples that you can play with. But if you look here, here's a tool where I can define my objectives, I can define my key results. It's built for purpose. You can see how I'm tracking. There's a feed of information as things get updated. And so looking at the examples here, like delight customers, and you can see I have this increase NPS score, address customer feedback, etc. So I think it's a very natural experience that Ally has done. They've got some pretty cool integrations too. So like, let's say you had a KR that said that your bug counts would be below a certain number. They actually integrate with like source control systems and can do queries, or integrating with other types of tracking systems where they can do queries and say, oh, okay, automatically it can say what the current value is based on the fact, oh, there's 5 bugs. You said you wanted to keep your bug count below 5, and now there's 5, and it can automatically do those updates for you. Anyway, didn't want to talk more about this, just wanted to show you there are purpose-built tools that you can use for OKRs. There's many that are out there. Ally is one that I've recently been playing with, and that is pretty popular. Okay, let's move on to the fun part. Before I do this, I have to call out my coworker who I often describe myself as sarcastic. And I know a lot of people that do that. I grew up in New York. Sarcasm seems to be in our blood. But recently, somebody I really respect, a good friend of mine, Hannah, told me, you should go look up sarcasm in the dictionary. And there's nothing funny about it in the definition. It's all about, like cutting, hurting. Hurting other people, saying things that are harmful. So it's kind of like, I'm feeling not too good about using that word anymore. But let's say there's some comedy in the approach that I'm going to show you. Can you see my slides? Okay, so how not to do OKRs. So let's start with the first one, which is you should ignore your OKRs. I mean, they're really just theater to satisfy management. It's a one-time thing. You do it once, never think about it again. I mean, if you do that, your OKRs are useless. They're not going to help you. This is a tool to actually help you, and they need to be kept alive. They need to be monitored and managed and updated. If you're not assigning grades, then you're not really having that opportunity to kind of look at where can we grow? What could we have done differently? So yeah. But if that's what you want to do, definitely you should do this. The next one is to make your OKRs really abstract. The less people that understand it, the better off you are. You're just going to get a rubber stamp and you're just going to get it through. So yeah, so don't do that. Make your OKRs concrete. They should be tangible. You want stakeholders to understand them. If just like one person understands them, because the whole idea too is you want to be able to get help. And in order to get help, people have to understand what it is that you're trying to do. And that help could be in the definition. Like, are we defining the right objectives that we're going to go after? But it also could be later on throughout the cycle when you're running into an issue and you're asking for help. It's like, oh, well, what was the objective? It's like, what does that mean? So, yeah.
And Glenn, if that last one would be one, if you can think of an example of something that an abstract OKR that someone was trying, I'd definitely love to hear an example.
Sure.
Might be hard to come up with one, but I'm interested.
Yeah, and these things are debatable. So recently we had a debate about, increased developer love, right? So it was kind of like increased developer love, like developer love means something different to every person. So, is it that, that would be an example. I mean, an Uber example would be like do stuff, right? Like that's not gonna mean anything to anyone. But I think if you do, so part of this, I think, is if you have, it's a great question. Something like developer love, like increased developer love, if we can all get on the same page of what developer love means, then that's probably fine. But if we put it, and like Jeremiah has a different interpretation of what developer love is, and oh, I see somebody's got their hand up. Is that?
I couldn't figure out how to take it down. Sorry.
No, it's no problem. I think it's in the emote. There's like a reactions.
Yeah,
area.
I clicked it and it didn't work.
Oh, no
yeah.
problem.
And just
Okay.
a time check, we have 16 more minutes.
Okay, I'll go faster. We're almost done. So make your OKRs your roadmap. So like whatever you have in your OKRs, that is your roadmap. Whatever you have in your roadmap, that is your OKRs. Your roadmap are the things you're going to do, the things that are on your roadmap, like if you have a product, these are the things we're thinking about. These are the problems we want to solve. But your OKRs are very timely. Like, here's what we're trying to do now. And the other thing, again, is going back to the impact side of things. Like your roadmap, ideally the items on your roadmap, a subset of them will be aligned with the business goals, but the two are not the same. So I've seen a lot of anti-patterns where like, oh, like our OKRs kind of need to be our roadmap. And that causes a lot of tension, and it ends up with OKRs that are not going to be as useful. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have a roadmap, but and some of the things that you're doing on your roadmap may be reflected in your OKRs, but don't make that assumption. And they're two separate things. They're both valuable. So I'm not saying that they're not both valuable. Okay, let's see if. So this is another similar one, which is to make each work item a KR, which means like we're doing tons of different work, and the work that we're doing, that's going to be the key result. Now, the first problem with this is the whole idea of OKRs is that you don't have to figure out everything that you're going to do in order to define the KRs. You're actually defining the KRs early on to say, here's the things that we think we want to impact. And you might have a high level idea of what that is, like in the example I showed about, oh, we're going to create applications to do so-and-so. That's okay. But to say, oh, we have like 5 apps, so we need a key KR for each app, that is an anti-pattern. One, it causes a huge amount of upfront work. And this is what I've seen when you're defining your KRs, because it's like now this has to be this constant discussion of we can't define this as a KR unless we know what it looks like and we're going to do it. And so, yeah, so that's what that anti-pattern is about. The next one is to change your objectives every week. So if you really want your OKRs to be useless and you want to really randomize your team, change your objectives every week. I mentioned early on, objectives should be things that live for a while. KRs can be changing, but even KRs should not be changing every week. But KRs generally change more frequently than objectives. Objectives really align with your vision, like your company's vision or your group's vision. Here's the places we really want to go, and these are the objectives that we've lined up. And eventually, hopefully, you hit those objectives. So they may change, but they're going to change either due to a major strategic shift where you've decided we're not doing this anymore, it's no longer an objective for our organization, or you actually achieved the objective, and at that point, you then decided to focus on a new objective. And this raises another really important point. These objectives should be achievable. The fact that we're pushing ourselves and being aggressive and reaching doesn't mean that they should never be achievable. If they're not achievable, I would argue they should not be an objective, because if they're not achievable, you're not going to be able to measure them. We're almost done. I love this one. They're your OKRs. Nobody has to see them. You manage them. You keep them. Of course, we don't want to do this. OKRs are all about transparency. You want to have as many stakeholders as possible understanding what these OKRs are. It's about alignment. Otherwise, we're going to have people going in a million different directions. The whole idea of OKRs is to prevent that from happening, all the way from top to bottom, to say we understand what's important, and now we're all going to do what we need to do to get there. I think that's my list. So thank you all very much, and appreciate the questions. And here's some additional resources. I'll share my slides.